The howling wind cut through the canyons of Arizona territory like a wolf's cry. It made the winter of 1874 the most brutal anyone could remember. 13-year-old Levi huddled inside his ramshackle cabin, a place that wasn't much more than a pile of logs clinging to a mountainside. It was the only home a half-breed orphan could claim in a land where neither the settlers nor the tribes wanted him. Snowflakes, thick and heavy as cotton tufts, were swallowing the world outside his single, grimy window. Inside, his small fire fought a losing battle against the drafts that found every single crack in the worn logs. Levi tossed the last of his precious firewood onto the dying flames. He knew the math. If the blizzard didn't break by morning, he wouldn't see another day. It was then, just as the night reached its absolute darkest, that a frantic, desperate pounding shook his door. Levi froze. No one ever came to his cabin. Ever. The settlers in the valley below pretended he didn't exist, and the Apache considered this land sacred, but empty. The pounding came again, louder this time, a frantic rhythm against the roar of the wind. It wasn't the sound of a friendly traveler. It was the sound of someone running for their life. He grabbed the old, cracked handle of his hunting knife, his knuckles white. Every instinct screamed at him to stay quiet, to let the storm swallow whatever was outside. But another part of him, a part he inherited from a mother he barely remembered, couldn't ignore the desperation in that sound. When he cautiously pulled the door open, the wind nearly ripped it from his grip. A figure stumbled in, a silhouette draped in snow-covered hides, collapsing onto the dirt floor. It was a woman. Her eyes were like obsidian, holding a terror so deep it chilled him more than the wind. But beneath it, there was a fire of fierce determination. A line of blood, already freezing, was streaked across her cheekbone where a branch or a bullet had grazed her. Outside, in the brief moment the door was open, he saw them. Hoofprints, already disappearing under the fresh, driving snow. She hadn't come alone. She was being hunted. No words passed between them. He didn't need any. Levi recognized the distinctive, intricate patterns on her clothing, the kind he'd only seen in whispers and warnings. Apache designs. But not just any Apache. These belonged to Tula, wife of the feared Chief Dasan Blackhawk. His name was a legend in the territory, a story told to frightened children and hardened men alike. A chief who had never lost a battle, never surrendered an inch of land, and whose revenge against those who wronged his people was swift and brutal. Helping this woman meant putting himself squarely between the most feared warrior in Arizona and whoever was chasing her. It was a death sentence, plain and simple. Despite the cold terror that seized his heart, Levi pulled her further inside and slammed the heavy bar across the door. He had just sealed his fate. He just didn't realize that his simple act of compassion would, by the time the sun rose, bring 200 Apache warriors to the valley below his cabin, their faces painted for war. Tula collapsed near the fire, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps as the melting snow dripped from her elaborate buckskin dress. She spoke in broken English, her voice a strained whisper against the storm's howl. 3 white hunters, she explained. They had ambushed her and her 2 guards during a sacred journey to the winter solstice prayer grounds. Her guards were dead. The hunters were after her. But why? They were hoping to claim the bounty, she said. A bounty secretly offered by a man named Captain Merrick Holt of the U.S. Cavalry. Gold for any Apache scalp, no questions asked. They didn't know who she was, only that her ornate dress marked her as someone important, someone whose scalp would fetch a high price. Levi felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Captain Holt was the commander at the nearby fort, a man praised in the settlements for bringing order to the frontier. Levi now saw that order was paid for in blood. He wrapped his one threadbare blanket around her shivering shoulders and offered her a tin cup of hot pine needle tea, the only remedy he had for the bone-deep cold. His few possessions told the story of his harsh life. Rabbit snares hanging from the walls, his single knife, and charcoal sketches of animals he'd drawn on the log walls themselves. Tula's eyes fell on the drawings. Her expression shifted from fear to surprise. She reached out a trembling finger and touched a drawing of an eagle in mid-flight. "You see," she whispered, her voice gaining a little strength. "With both eyes open. Most white men see with eyes half closed. They miss the spirit beneath the skin." The cabin creaked and groaned, the storm trying to tear it apart. He stuffed rags into the worst of the gaps, fighting back the sifting snow. He had never spoken to an Apache before, not in the 3 years since his mother had died of fever and left him utterly alone. Then a sound pierced the storm's wail, a distant crack of gunfire. It was followed by men's voices, faint but clear, carried on the wind. The hunters. They hadn't given up. They were still out there, tracking her with a determination born of greed. Levi moved fast. "Here," he whispered, pulling at a loose set of floorboards in the corner. It was where he kept his only treasures, his mother's locket, a worn book of poetry, and a small pouch of seeds for the spring planting. "Hide here." He helped her into the cramped, dark space. He had just enough time to replace the boards and throw a ragged rug over them when heavy, angry fists pounded on his door again. "Open up, boy," a gruff voice commanded. "We know you're in there, we saw the smoke, and we ain't leaving till we check every inch of this shack." Levi's heart hammered against his ribs. He took a deep breath, summoning a courage he didn't know he had, and opened the door. 3 frost-covered men stood there, their faces grim, their rifles held at the ready. Their eyes were as cold as the storm behind them. The leader, a big man with a scarred face and a tobacco-stained beard, pushed past Levi without a word, soaking in the cabin's meager warmth. "Saw tracks leading here," he growled, his eyes scanning every dark corner. He kicked at Levi's few belongings. An Apache woman, worth good money. He leaned in close, his breath stinking of whiskey and something sour. "You tell us where she's hiding, boy, and maybe we'll share a piece of the reward with you." Levi shook his head, forcing himself to look confused. "Nobody's been here but me," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "The storm's playing tricks on your eyes. It happens in these mountains." The youngest of the 3 hunters, a boy not much older than Levi, pointed a dirty finger toward the rough-hewn table. "Then what's that?" Levi's blood ran cold. The second tin cup, the one he'd given to Tula, was still steaming on the table. "The boy's lying," the youngest one snarled, his hand dropping to the hilt of a large knife on his belt. "And I know just how to make him talk." Before any of them could move, Levi lunged for the old rifle he kept propped against the wall. The action surprised him as much as it did the hunters. "That's my mother's cup," he lied, his voice cracking but his hands surprisingly firm on the weapon. "I always set it out during storms. She died 3 winters ago. It helps me feel less alone." The scarred leader stared at Levi, his cold eyes searching the boy's face for any sign of deception. The cabin groaned under another furious blast of wind. For a long moment, nobody moved. Something in Levi's unwavering gaze, in the raw grief he projected, seemed to give the man pause. Maybe it reminded him of something he'd lost a long time ago. "Check outside again," he ordered his companions, his eyes never leaving Levi. The boy might be telling the truth. This damn snow can make a man see his own ghosts. The other 2 hunters grumbled, but reluctantly headed back out into the blizzard, promising to circle back at first light if the weather cleared. The leader gave Levi one last hard look before following them. Levi slammed the bar back across the door, his legs finally giving way. He slid to the floor, trembling, not from the cold, but from the terrifying closeness of death. He'd bought them some time, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that they would be back, and when they returned, they wouldn't be so easily fooled. Hours passed in suffocating silence. Tula remained hidden beneath the floorboards, and Levi kept watch at the window, peering into the swirling white abyss. Exhaustion finally claimed him, and he slumped against the wall, the fire burning down to nothing but glowing embers. He awoke to an eerie, absolute quiet. The kind of silence that only follows a great storm when the world seems to hold its breath, reborn and pristine. Dawn's first light painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, reflecting off a landscape transformed. The valley below his cabin was a sea of perfect, untouched white. But it wasn't untouched. The sunlight revealed something else. Dark figures, scattered across the valley floor. They were so still they could have been mistaken for trees or rocks, if not for the occasional glint of metal catching the morning rays. Warriors. Dozens of them. Their faces were painted for war. As he watched, more emerged from the tree line, their numbers growing until he lost count. Some were on horseback, their mounts adorned with feathers and painted symbols. Others stood in silent, disciplined formations. All of them were facing his humble cabin. A cold knot of dread formed in Levi's stomach as he helped Tula from her hiding place. She moved to the window, her expression unreadable as she gazed down at the silent army. "My husband has come," she said, her voice calm. She straightened her rumpled dress, her regal dignity returning despite the ordeal. Suddenly, the floor of the cabin vibrated. The thunder of approaching hooves. A single rider had broken from the main group and was ascending the path to the cabin at a full gallop. Unlike the others, this warrior wore an elaborate headdress of eagle feathers that streamed behind him like a banner of command. Levi didn't need to be told who it was. The descriptions whispered in fear around settler campfires were unmistakable. Chief Dasan Blackhawk. "They will think you took me," Tula said, placing a hand on Levi's shoulder. The gesture could have been comfort, or it could have been a farewell. "I will speak the truth, but you must show no fear. To the Apache, fear is like blood to a wolf. It awakens a terrible hunger." Levi stepped outside. The brightness of the sun on the fresh snow was blinding. He held his hands open and empty at his sides. The valley below was now filled with warriors, at least 200 of them, and their collective gaze felt as heavy as stone. Chief Dasan Blackhawk reined his powerful paint stallion to a halt just feet from Levi. His obsidian eyes assessed the boy who stood before his cabin like a lone sapling facing down a forest fire. The chief's face was a mask of stone, but the tension in his powerful body spoke of a barely contained fury. Two warriors flanked him, their rifles aimed directly at Levi's chest. Tula emerged from the cabin, standing tall and proud. A visible ripple of relief and surprise went through the assembled Apache. "This boy holds my wife," Dasan stated, his English perfect and precise, his voice carrying the cold weight of judgment. "The punishment for taking what belongs to the chief is known to all who share these mountains." Levi swallowed, the sound loud in the unnatural quiet. He kept his gaze locked on the chief's. "I sheltered her," he said, his voice shaking only slightly. "From the storm, and from hunters who would have taken her scalp for bounty. I didn't know she was your wife until after I had already offered her my help." Tula stepped forward and began to speak rapidly in Apache, her hands moving in sharp, emphatic gestures. She recounted the ambush, the escape, the blizzard, and the boy's courage in hiding her from the men who had tracked her to his very door. The chief's expression remained unreadable. He dismounted, towering over Levi, his presence immense and intimidating. "Why would a white boy help an Apache woman? Your kind sees us only as obstacles to be removed from the land you wish to steal." "I'm not white," Levi answered, his voice finding a surprising strength. "My father was Shoshone, my mother white. Neither world claims me. I helped her because a storm kills without caring what blood flows in your veins." Dasan circled Levi slowly, like a wolf studying its prey. He noted the boy's worn clothing, the profound solitude of the cabin. "Where is your family? No boy lives alone in these mountains unless fate has been cruel. Fever took my mother 3 winters past. I never knew my father," Levi said. "The settlers below tolerate me because I trap furs they can buy cheap, but their doors are always closed to me." A low murmur ran through the gathered warriors. Tula spoke again, pointing to the charcoal drawings visible through the cabin's open door. She explained how the boy saw with clear eyes, how he respected the spirits of the animals he was forced to hunt for survival. "The hunters who pursued me will return," Tula warned, her eyes scanning the horizon. "They serve a blue-coat captain who pays in gold for our deaths. This boy risked his life to save mine, when he could have easily earned that gold for himself." As if her words were a summons, a glint of metal flashed on the far side of the valley. The morning sun was catching the brass buttons and rifle barrels of a column of soldiers emerging from the eastern pass. The U.S. cavalry had arrived. Dasan's face hardened into granite. He barked out a series of sharp orders, and his warriors instantly melted into defensive positions among the rocks and trees with practiced, deadly efficiency. "It seems we must postpone your judgment, boy," the chief said, his eyes now fixed on the approaching soldiers. "The bluecoats bring a trial of their own." Captain Merrick Holt led 30 soldiers into the valley, their blue uniforms a stark, arrogant slash against the pristine snow. Unlike the Apache, who moved like ghosts across the land, the cavalry made no attempt at stealth. Their confidence bordered on suicidal arrogance. Holt raised a pair of field glasses, his cold eyes taking in the scene. Flanking him were the 3 hunters from the night before. The scarred leader pointed an eager finger toward Levi's cabin. Well, it appears we've found more than just a rogue band," Holt remarked to his lieutenant, a sliver of cruel satisfaction in his voice. "That's Black Hawk himself, and if I'm not mistaken, his precious wife beside him. This day has just become very profitable." Holt had built a fearsome reputation on pacifying native territories. Whispers followed him everywhere he went, stories of massacres disguised as battles, of treaties broken before the ink was dry. His methods were brutal, but they earned him promotions, leaving a trail of blood and tears across the southwest. From his vantage point on the hillside, Levi could see how hopelessly outnumbered the soldiers were. Yet Holt advanced as if victory were a foregone conclusion. There was something more than military confidence driving him. It was a fanatic's zeal. Dasan held his warriors in check, his years of experience telling him that Holt's boldness meant one of 2 things. Either he was a fool, or he held a hidden advantage. Neither possibility was good for his people. The scarred hunter spotted Levi and spat a brown stream of tobacco juice onto the pure white snow. "That's the half-breed whelp who harbored the squaw," he yelled, his voice carrying across the valley. Holt raised a white flag, the universal signal for a parley, but his other hand never strayed far from the butt of his holstered pistol. "Chief Blackhawk!" he called out, his voice ringing with false authority. "By order of the United States government, you and your warriors are trespassing on territory designated for settlement." A wave of silent, cold anger passed through the Apache ranks. To be called trespassers on the land that had cradled their ancestors since the beginning of time was an insult of the highest order. "This land speaks our name in every stream and every stone," Dasan called back, his voice calm but carrying an authority that needed no shouting. "Your paper claims mean nothing to mountains that have known the Apache since the first dawn." Holt urged his horse forward, a thin, predatory smile on his lips that never reached his eyes. "The government is prepared to negotiate your relocation to a reservation where your people will be provided for." His gaze flickered between Tula and Levi. "I see you've already captured the boy responsible for interfering with my men. Hand him over for proper military justice. and we can begin our discussions in good faith." Dasan remained silent, weighing options that all seemed to lead to bloodshed. Then, unexpectedly, Levi stepped forward. "Captain Holt pays bounties for Apache scalps," he announced, his voice cracking at first, then growing stronger. "I heard his hunters boasting about it while they searched my cabin for Tula." A dangerous stillness fell over the valley. Holt's hand tightened on his pistol. "The boy is a savage sympathizer," he said smoothly, his eyes like chips of ice. "His mixed blood has confused his loyalties. There are no such bounties under official military policy." The three hunters shifted uncomfortably. Their nervous glances and guilty expressions told a different story. The youngest hunter, barely a man, couldn't hide a nervous swallow as hundreds of Apache eyes turned to fix on him. But that wasn't the only secret Levi held. "I found something you should see," Levi said quietly to Dasan, his back to the soldiers. He reached slowly into his pocket, pulling out a folded, worn piece of paper. This fell from the tall one's pocket when he stumbled during the storm. He had found it on the floor after they'd left. He hadn't thought much of it then, but now its importance was terrifyingly clear. He handed the paper to Dasan. The chief unfolded it. It wasn't just a simple letter. It was a crude map of the surrounding Apache territory. Several locations, sacred grounds, and ancient burial sites were marked with red ink. But it was the handwritten note scrawled in the margin that made the blood freeze in Dasan's veins. Gold deposits confirmed. Strongest veins run through sacred sites. Remove indigenous obstacles by spring. Authorization. M.H. Tula gasped as she looked over her husband's shoulder, recognizing the landmarks. "He hunts not just for our lives," she said, her voice tight with a cold, controlled fury. "He hunts for the very heart of our mountains." The soldiers were not just here for bounties. They were here for gold. A secret, illegal mining operation, sanctioned by their own captain. This wasn't a military action. It was a conspiracy to commit theft and mass murder. Lieutenant James Foster, Holt's second-in-command, edged his horse closer to see the map. His face, initially loyal and stern, shifted to shock and then to raw disgust as he read the note. Foster was a career soldier, a man who had enlisted to protect settlements, not to massacre people for personal profit. "Captain," Foster began, his voice low and dangerous, "if these allegations are true." "Control yourself, Lieutenant," Holt snapped, his mask of diplomacy finally crumbling. "These are necessary wartime tactics against a hostile force." Sensing the sudden deep division among the bluecoats, Dasan made a subtle hand signal. His warriors shifted their positions, silent as shadows, moving to exploit this unexpected fracture in the enemy's unity. Levi, caught between two armies but now fully committed, decided to take one last, desperate risk. "There are witnesses," he blurted out, his voice carrying across the snow. "In the settlement, traders and miners. They've seen gold shipments leaving Captain Holt's private quarters at night. They whisper about army wagons heading east, loaded with something heavy, something that isn't military supplies." Foster's face hardened. Other soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. The rumors about their commander's mysterious wealth, his private investments back east, suddenly clicked into place. Holt had been flouting military regulations for years, and now, a half-breed boy in the middle of a frozen valley, was pulling the entire conspiracy apart. "The boy speaks with a forked tongue to save his own hide," Holt snarled, but the accusation had lost its power. The seeds of doubt had been sown, and they were taking root. The scarred hunter, seeing his patron and his payday slipping away, made a rash decision. He raised his rifle, aiming it directly at Levi, hoping to silence the boy for good. Before anyone could even shout a warning, Tula moved. She threw herself in front of Levi, shielding him with her own body. The action was so stunning, so contrary to every expectation, that it froze the entire tableau of soldiers and warriors alike. the wife of the great Chief Blackhawk, risking her life for an outcast boy. The hunter's finger tightened on the trigger, his hatred overriding his sense, but the shot never came. A single pistol cracked through the cold air. The hunter spun around, clutching his shoulder, his rifle falling uselessly into the snow. It was Lieutenant Foster who had fired. His pistol was now leveled not at the Apache, but directly at his own commanding officer. "Stand down," Foster commanded, his voice ringing with newfound authority. "As of this moment, Captain, you are relieved of command. There will be a full and official investigation into these gold shipments and these unauthorized bounties." The other soldiers hesitated, their loyalties torn between the chain of command and the undeniable evidence of corruption and murder laid bare before them. Holt's face contorted into a mask of pure rage. "This is mutiny, Lieutenant. These savages have killed dozens of settlers, and you dare to side with them against your own kind?" The two remaining hunters, seeing the tables had turned, began to back away. Their allegiance to Holt was bought with gold, not loyalty. With no promise of a payday and the very real threat of military justice, they abandoned him to his fate. Snow began to fall again, light, gentle flakes drifting down, as if nature itself were trying to cool the tensions that threatened to ignite the valley in blood. Dasan watched the conflict among the white men with the infinite patience of a hunter, recognizing that sometimes the wisest move is to let your enemies destroy each other. An elderly Apache warrior stepped forward. His face was a roadmap of deep lines, etched by a century of wisdom. He was seas beyond mountains, the tribe's medicine man, and Dasan's most trusted advisor. "The boy," the old man said, his English halting but clear. "He bridges two worlds that have forgotten how to speak without weapons. Perhaps the Great Spirit sent this storm so that different bloods could remember they are all children of the same earth." Lieutenant Foster slowly lowered his pistol, though he kept a wary eye on his disgraced captain. "My father was a traitor," he said, his voice filled with a conviction that surprised even himself. "He traded fairly with the Cherokee before they were forced west. He taught me that honor doesn't change its meaning when you cross a tribal boundary. But Captain Holt was not a man to be defeated by honor. He saw this moment of philosophical reflection as an opportunity. He gave a subtle, almost invisible signal to two soldiers who were still loyal to him, men who were part of his inner circle, partners in his crimes. They didn't reach for their standard-issue army carbines. They reached for something else. Concealed weapons, specially crafted repeating rifles, capable of firing multiple shots with devastating speed. Levi, whose life had depended on noticing the smallest details, saw the subtle movement. He saw the shift in their eyes, the slight tension in their hands. "Duck!" he screamed, shoving Tula hard towards her husband as the first shots rang out. The bullets splintered the logs of his cabin, right where their heads had been moments before. Chaos erupted. The fragile truce shattered. Apache warriors and loyal army soldiers alike dove for cover as Holt's assassins opened fire, indiscriminately. The peaceful valley transformed into a confused, swirling battlefield of snow and gunpowder smoke, where friend and foe were nearly impossible to distinguish. Seas beyond mountains, with surprising speed, pulled Levi behind a large boulder as bullets ricocheted off the stone around them. The old man placed a hand on the boy's forehead. "You have the sight," the elder said, his voice calm amidst the mayhem. "Your dreams showed you this day would come, though you did not understand their meaning." It was true. Levi had been plagued by vivid nightmares for weeks, dreams of standing between two charging armies, of a sky filled with fire. He had dismissed them as fever dreams, the product of hunger and loneliness. Now, crouched behind a rock with bullets whizzing past, he understood. They weren't dreams, they were warnings. Through a gap in the rocks, he saw Captain Holt. The captain had mounted his horse and was making a desperate escape towards the eastern pass. A heavy saddlebag, bulging and lumpy, was slung across his horse. His gold, his escape plan. Without thinking, driven by an instinct he didn't know he possessed, Levi snatched up a bow and a single arrow, dropped by a fallen warrior nearby. It was a skill he had learned out of necessity, hunting rabbits and squirrels during long winters when rifle ammunition was too precious to waste. He drew the string back, his arm steady. The world seemed to slow down. The shouting, the gunfire, the swirling snow, it all faded away. There was only him, the arrow, and the fleeing captain. He let the arrow fly. It soared through the chaotic battlefield, an impossible shot. It struck not Holt, not his horse, but the thick leather strap holding the saddlebag. The strap snapped. The heavy bag, filled with gold, tumbled into the snow. The sudden shift in weight caused the horse to shy violently. Holt was thrown from the saddle, landing hard. He cried out in pain, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle beneath him. The fighting stopped. As if by a shared signal, every soldier and every warrior paused to witness the fall of the man who had caused all of this. Lieutenant Foster seized the moment. "Cease fire!" he roared, his voice echoing across the now silent valley. He removed his hat, a gesture of respect toward Dasan. "This conflict is not between our peoples. It is against one man's greed." Dasan considered the lieutenant's words. He weighed a lifetime of his people's suffering, a history of broken promises, against this single, fragile opportunity to avoid more bloodshed. After a long, heavy silence, he raised his hand. His warriors lowered their weapons, though their eyes remained vigilant, ready to fight at a moment's notice. Foster approached the fallen captain. Holt was clutching his broken leg, but his other hand was scrabbling desperately in the snow, trying to gather the scattered contents of the burst saddlebag. Gold nuggets and gold dust mingled with the white snow, a glittering, obscene testament to his corruption, exposed for all to see. "Captain Merrick Holt," Foster declared, his voice ringing with the cold authority of military law. "I place you under arrest for corruption, inciting civilian violence against indigenous peoples, and gross violations of the Treaty of 1868. He ripped the insignia of rank from Holt's uniform. The two soldiers who had fired the first shots threw down their rifles and surrendered, surrounded by both Apache warriors and their former comrades, now united against them. Justice, a thing so rarely seen in these contested lands, seemed for one brief moment to be possible. Dasan walked over to Levi, who stood trembling, not from fear, but from the sudden violent release of the tension that had held him together. "You shot well," the chief observed, his eyes holding a new and profound respect. "Not to kill, but to reveal the truth." Tula joined them. She gently took the bow from Levi's hands. "This belonged to my brother," she said softly. "He fell defending our hunting grounds last summer. He would be pleased that his bow served to protect life rather than to take it." The medicine man, seas beyond mountains, shuffled forward, his ancient eyes fixed on Levi with an unsettling intensity. "This boy has no tribe," he said to Dasan. "Yet he fights for a justice that benefits all tribes. Such courage must be recognized." As Foster organized his men to secure Holt and his accomplices for the long journey back to the fort, he approached Dasan again. He removed his glove and offered his bare hand. "When my new commanding officer learns of Holt's deception, he will honor the existing boundaries of your territory," Foster promised. "No gold is worth the blood that was almost shed here today." Dasan clasped the offered hand, a brief but significant gesture. It was not a gesture of full trust, but of a willingness to see if peace was possible. "We will watch," the chief replied, the wisdom of generations of broken treaties in his voice. "We will see if your words walk the same path as your actions." As the soldiers began their solemn departure, leading their prisoners away, Dasan turned and addressed his warriors in their native tongue. His words were powerful, and as he spoke, every warrior turned to look at Levi, their expressions shifting from suspicion to surprise, and then to a reluctant but undeniable acceptance. Whatever the chief had said, it had changed the boy's status among them in a deep and fundamental way. With the soldiers gone, Levi stood alone and uncertain. His cabin, damaged by gunfire, offered little comfort against the brutal winter that still gripped the mountains. He belonged to neither world, and now he had nowhere to go. Dasan approached him, his stern face softened by something Levi had never expected to see there. "You risked everything for my wife, when you had nothing to gain," the chief said, his voice no longer holding judgment, but something else entirely. "Our people value such honor above all things." The warriors, 200 of them, formed a large silent circle around Levi. Seas beyond mountains shuffled forward again. In his ancient, trembling hands, he held a small leather pouch decorated with sacred symbols. "The spirits speak of a boy caught between two rivers," the old man intoned, his voice a low chant. "Belonging to neither bank, yet understanding the flow of both waters. Such vision is rare." He opened the pouch, revealing a deep red ochre pigment. With practiced, gentle fingers, the medicine man traced ancient symbols on Levi's forehead and cheeks. These were markings of honor, usually reserved only for Apache youths who had proven their courage in their first battle. In living memory, no outsider, let alone a half-blood, had ever been given such an honor. "You are Nalish Dayaji Nakus," Dasan proclaimed, his voice booming across the valley. "He who faced the storm." Each of the 200 warriors repeated the name in a low, respectful chorus. "Nalish Dayaji Nakus." "You are not Apache by blood," the chief declared, placing a hand on Levi's shoulder. "But you are now Apache by heart. The mountains themselves will know your name." Tula stepped forward. In her hands, she held a beautiful necklace of carved bone and brilliant blue turquoise. It had belonged to her fallen brother, the one whose bow Levi had used. "This carries his strength," she said, placing it around the boy's neck. "It will remind you that courage can create a family that is stronger than blood." The valley, which only hours before had stood on the brink of a massacre, now witnessed something that had never happened before. An outsider, an outcast, was being brought into the spiritual protection of a people who had survived for centuries by maintaining the strictest of boundaries. Seas beyond mountains placed his gnarled hands on Levi's shoulders. "You will walk between worlds," he prophesied. "You will not fully belong to either. Your path will be to build bridges where others see only chasms." As the ceremony concluded, several warriors began to dismantle Levi's damaged cabin, salvaging the usable logs and materials. Others constructed a travois, a type of sled, and loaded it with gifts: dried meats, warm furs, tools, and pouches of healing herbs. They were giving him everything he needed to survive the rest of the winter. Dasan offered him a place in their winter camp, a place among their people for the remainder of the harsh season. But as Levi looked at the faces around him, a new feeling stirred within him. The ceremony hadn't just given him a name, it had awakened a restlessness, a sense of purpose. "I must find my own path," Levi said, his hand instinctively going to the turquoise necklace at his throat. "But I will carry this honor with me always. And I will remember that I found a family in the heart of the most unexpected storm." His simple, honest words earned him nods of understanding from the warriors, who valued independence and strength above all else. By midday, they had given him one last gift, a strong, painted pony. Levi mounted the horse, his few possessions and new supplies secured. He turned his face toward the western passes, toward a future he could not yet see. Behind him, 200 Apache warriors raised their hands in a silent, solemn farewell to the boy who had been an outcast, but was now a legend. The boy who faced the storm. Spring arrived, melting the snow and washing the memory of conflict from the valley. Wildflowers bloomed on the hillside where Levi's cabin had once stood. Lieutenant Foster, promoted to captain, kept his word. A new treaty was drawn, and this time it was honored. The gold remained in the sacred mountains, untouched. The story of the standoff spread through the territory like wildfire, growing with each telling. Settlers spoke in awe of a half-blood youth who had single-handedly prevented a war. In Apache camps, mothers told their children the story of Nalishdayaji Nakus, the boy with the heart of a warrior, who proved that honor was not a matter of blood, but of courage. That summer, Tula gave birth to a son. His first gift was a small charcoal drawing of an eagle in flight, delivered by a traveling trader who said a solitary young man riding west had given it to him, with instructions to carry it to the wife of the great Apache chief. Captain Holt was tried and convicted in a military court far to the east. The gold he had killed for bought him nothing but a lifetime in a dark prison cell. And Levi? He was never seen in that valley again. But his legend lived on. Travelers crossing the territories would sometimes tell stories of a mysterious, solitary young man who seemed to appear out of nowhere during blizzards to guide the lost to safety, or who would arrive at moments of tension between settlers and natives, speaking both languages and somehow forging peace where there should have been blood. They all mentioned the same details: strange painted symbols on his gear, and a brilliant turquoise necklace that seemed to glow in the firelight. And so, a poor, lonely boy, who once had nothing to offer but a cup of pine needle tea and a sliver of compassion, left a legacy that outlived all the gold in the mountains. He was proof that sometimes the greatest strength is found not in belonging to one world, but in having the courage to stand between two. If this tale of courage, honor, and standing between worlds touched your heart, remember that stories like the boy who faced the storm only continue when you become part of our storytelling community. Just as Levi found his place between two worlds, you too have found a home here, where forgotten frontier legends come alive. Hit that subscribe button now to ensure you never miss our next powerful historical narrative. Show your appreciation with a like, as each one helps these untold stories reach others searching for meaning in today's divided world. Share this video with friends and family who appreciate tales of unexpected heroes and bridges built across impossible divides. Where are you experiencing this story from? Let us know in the comments which city you're watching from, and tell us what moment resonated most with you. Like the Apache warriors who recognize truth beyond bloodlines, your engagement creates a legacy that ensures these powerful stories endure for generations to come.